Hello and welcome everybody to our webcast on the subject of key performance indicators, KPIs, the KPI paradox and the P2P Procure-to-Pay, purchase-to-pay cycle. And not forgetting the significance of the watermelon effect, more of that later. So thank you all for joining the session today. As we go through the session, if you do have questions, then please type them into the chat panel on your screen. We will answer questions either at the end of the webcast, time permitting, or we'll answer directly by email subsequent to the webcast. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Steve Rooney. I work as a managing consultant for Consider Solutions, working with our customers across Europe and North America. And with me today, I have Emma Taylor, who is a consultant in our world-class finance team. So the primary theme of the webcast is KPIs in P2P, although much of the discussion is relevant to all other finance processes. However, a very important growing emerging role where KPIs are critical is that of the global process owner, the GPO. We will be discussing the context of the GPO role. Our aim of this session is to share some experiences and discuss some of the nuances to consider when working out an effective set of KPIs for your organization and the nature of those KPIs. Considering aspects that may not be uppermost in our minds when KPIs are set, and we're in the day-to-day business of trying to meet the specific targets set by the KPIs. KPIs are a target, and any kind of target influences behavior to meet such targets. Local tactics develop, and some of which may be undesirable. So the focus can be on the letter of the KPI rather than the spirit of the KPI, the broad intent and context. And the focus can be heavily toward finding ways to meet today's individual target without sufficient balance toward the broader business context and improving how we are working. I think it's fair to say that KPIs are common practice, but common sense is not always applied in their use. So just a brief introduction to Consider Solutions. We're focused on helping our customers improve and optimize their finance processes to support the achievement of desired business results, keep the cost of finance to an optimized level, enable good cash flow, whilst ensuring risk within the finance processes is effectively managed. Essentially helping companies move toward a high-class or ideally a world-class finance operation. In that context, there are three key pillars to the work we do. Control and compliance, generally in support of regulatory requirements and good governance. Risk assurance, to ensure risk can be effectively managed, monitored, and where needed, mitigated. And process optimization, identifying areas where the processes can be improved and optimized. And underpinning our three pillars, we have the IT infrastructure and ERP systems such as SAP, Oracle, and others that are used to support and execute the finance processes. Here are some of the companies we work with across many industries. I know some of you are on the webcast. And these are representative of the companies helping to inform our experience and the discussions that we facilitate. Today we will focus on KPIs in scope of the P2P process. However, as I mentioned, the discussion is relevant to all finance processes, such as order to cash, general ledger, record to report. And this graph from KPMG provides useful context to how the focus and priority of spending is changing over the years in finance processes. So in the last decade, the 2000s, significant focus was on controls. This was largely driven by regulations such as Sarbanes-Oxley that were issued after the accounting scandals of that time. And this focused on reduction of risk. The general trend has also been in reducing the cost of finance operations through use of ERP systems to automate, shared service centers to centralize common processes, and outsourcing to use lower cost resourcing. The focus is now moving toward driving better performance in finance processes and driving value for the business while continuing to effectively manage the risk and keep the operational costs down. And the balance of the priorities is key to the role of the process owner. So looking at the context of the role of global process owners, the theme of process ownership is very topical, and the job title of process owner is becoming ever more common. So why are these roles needed now when they were not needed in the past? Well, this slide provides some context. Starting at the top right, pieces of the end-to-end process are now commonly distributed across different groups and different locations, countries and continents. For example, vendor management may be in Australia, purchase requests and orders may be managed in South America, for goods to be received in Texas, and finally invoices processed and payments made by a shared service group in Eastern Europe. The whole process is enabled by an ERP system and other IT systems. The systems enable the process to be distributed and different pieces to be performed by different groups in different locations, even different companies. The systems simplify the automation, but the apparent simplicity offered by the automation belies the complexity under the covers. There is no longer a line of sight. No one person sees the end-to-end cycle of the process execution. Insight into and transparency of the end-to-end process is much reduced compared to the past, when the process may have been executed in one location and you knew the key people involved. Moving to the top left, with the reducing insight and transparency comes greater risk. And as an example of the resulting impact, the ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, have determined that over the past few years, losses due to fraud, waste and error amount to about 5% of revenues. And moving below to the bottom left, we can see from PwC the typical areas where losses occur. So asset misappropriation being by far the highest impacting area. Over to the bottom right, it's reasonable to expect cost of assurance to reduce if our processes are working well. But in many cases, fees are rising as the underlying complexity has increased and transparency has decreased, leading to increased risk. So progress has been made on efficiency, but there are challenges in getting to grips with the global end-to-end execution of processes. Most organizations now either have the GPO role in some form or are planning to establish the role. However, the scope and authority of the role varies organization to organization. The catalyst for the GPO role may vary. It could be implementing an ERP system, compliance needs, introduction of a shared service center, and so on. And there are different definitions for the role. However, typically, it will cover the key elements shown here. So ownership of the end-to-end process across functional silos, geographic and business unit boundaries, responsibility for the performance of the process and achieving the key objectives, accountability for governance and control, and also authority, accountability, and ability to drive change and improvements. In each organization, it's important to be clear on what the role means, what is the scope, and what authority does the role have. It's important to know whether the GPO is managing today's process as well as leading direction for the future, or whether this is two separate roles. It's common to have a service operator managing today and the process owner leading for the future. However, in that case, the two have to work closely together. This slide, based on the work of John Cotter on the different context for leadership, is very pertinent to the role of the GPO. Both operating models are needed. So again, managing today and leading for the future. It's important to be clear on who is doing what. Regarding KPIs, the focus and scope of the role will affect the performance measures and drivers implemented, as your goals and objectives will vary depending on the angle you come from. The scope and breadth of the ownership, of the process ownership role may also vary. For example, the Procure-to-Pay process typically it encompasses the steps on this slide, from requesting goods to gaining quotations, placing purchase orders, receiving the goods, receiving the invoice from the supplier, and making payments. A reduced version of that would be invoice to pay, so picking up owning the process from receipt of invoice through to paying the invoice. And an expanded version would be source to pay. So this one, in addition to what we've already looked at, covers the proactive sourcing and monitoring of supplier performance. So different scopes of responsibility for the process owner role in this context. Now, we have a couple of audience polls for you guys to get involved in, and it'd be interesting to know the general scope and drivers for the audience we have. So I'll ask Emma to walk you through the polls.
All right, so yeah, we're going to have quite a few polls for you to get involved in, just, you know, basically to make sure that you're awake, and also to get a snapshot of who we've got listening in, what you're involved in. This is all anonymised, but we will be feeding the results back to you at the end, so please do get your answers in. First one, hopefully, is a relatively simple one to answer. It is, what is the scope of your role? So is it A, you're involved in source to pay? So as Steve just said, a slightly broader view, genuinely addressing sourcing. B, purchase to pay. C, invoice to pay, perhaps from a shared service centre view. D, another process, so record to report or order to cash. Or E, other, are you a consultant, observer, etc. So please keep your answers coming in. I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, let's have a look at the results. Okay, so most of you are working in purchase to pay. That makes sense with the focus of the webcast today. Quite a few observers or consultants or other, and then a nice even mix between the others. That's great, thank you very much. Second poll for you is on the screen now. What is your primary driver for investing in a global P2P process? 5 options again. A, reducing maverick spend, reducing the cost of goods and services, spending less, getting more, driving value. B, driving down the cost of the process operation, so to do with the efficiency of people. C, reduce cycle time of process, make buying simple, make it quicker. D, manage risk and compliance more effectively. Or E, optimizing cash management. So if I could please get your answers in for that would be great. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. 5 seconds. And let's have a look at the results. Okay, so quite an even mix actually. The highest one there is driving down the cost of process operations, about efficiency of people. The one following that is managing risk and compliance more effectively, okay? But a nice even spread between them. That's great. Lovely. Thank you very much for your answers. Steve.
Thanks for that, Emma, and thanks everybody for contributing to the polls. So to the topic of the day, KPIs, key performance indicators. There are different types of KPIs. Lagging, so after the event, the output of the process, typically used to measure or indicate how successful we are, so measuring what we are producing. Generally, most KPIs are used fall into this category. Leading indicators, so in advance, during the process, are we doing the right things to achieve the results we desire? So monitoring our capacity to produce. If our leading indicators are good, then there's a better chance that our lagging indicators will also be good. If the leading indicators are not good, then something needs improving. A key question is, do the leading indicators indicate what needs to improve? Effectively, we should have a good balance of indicators that are serving as both measures and drivers. So performance measures supported by the lagging indicators, revenue per employee, for example, cost per sale, cycle time, for example, for processing an invoice, and performance drivers supported by the leading indicators. So for example, what's the quality of the input to our process? What's the level and quality of the training we are providing? What's the degree to which we are automating, for example, use of electronic invoicing? And Emma, next poll.
Okay, third poll is, how do you use KPIs today? 5 options again. A, to measure success. So, as Steve's just defined, probably more lagging indicators. B, to measure what needs to improve, more leading indicators. C, to tell us how to improve. D, to continue to drive continuous improvement. Or E, you're not sure. So 10 more seconds on this one. I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds. Okay, let's have a look at the results. So, wow, 50% of you are using them to drive continuous improvement. That's great to hear. The next highest is measuring what needs to improve, so more leading indicators, okay? And then after that, kind of a split between measuring success and not sure, and no one is using them to tell us how to improve. Wow, okay, that's really interesting. Thank you very much for your answers on that.
Thanks again. Interesting feedback there. In the context of performance, here are a few examples of the common objectives, outcomes companies are looking to achieve. These are generic, but it's very much about your own context and perspective. The key thing is to review and agree what is right for the organization, right for the end-to-end process you're looking at, and right for your role within the organization. So start with the desired outcomes and goals, then decide what behavior you want to drive to achieve the outcome, and then set the KPI to drive that behavior and ultimately to achieve the outcome. And look for a balance of KPIs focused on outcomes and KPIs focused on driving value. The question is, does that give us enough to improve performance? If our indicators are not good enough, do we know what are the root causes of the suboptimal performance? And we will return to this point later. And time for another poll.
Okay, fourth poll is, how well balanced are your KPIs? So 4 options on this one. A, you're primarily using lagging KPIs, so more performance measures. B, you're using more leading KPIs, the performance drivers. C, you're using a nice healthy balance of leading and lagging KPIs. Or D, you aren't that healthy, but you're not entirely sure why. So I'm going to leave that open for 10 more seconds. Great to get your input on this. As I say, you will receive this information post-event. So 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and let's have a look at the results. So most of you have answered that you're using lagging KPIs, more performance measures, 52% of you, that's quite high. And then a kind of a split between a healthy balance and then not that healthy. And then a few less of you using primarily leading KPIs. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks again. So the prime focus on lagging there. In the context of P2P, here are typical themes around which KPIs are based. So quality and timeliness of the input to the process itself and the output of the process. Essentially KPIs internal to the process itself and how it is working today. There are some examples shown on the screen. And moving down the screen, we've got the quality and timelines related to improving the process. So if we're not improving, then our KPIs are not as effective as they could be. And it's good to hear from the audience we have, there is a strong focus on the improvement angle. Then we move down to the satisfaction of customers and vendors, and this is a key balancing perspective. So our internal KPIs may look good, but what do our partners think? It's great looking internal KPIs with a reducing customer base is not a good place to be. And last but not least, we've got the satisfaction and ongoing development of employees. So our KPI of invoices per person may be looking very good, but are we putting too much pressure on the accounts payable team? Is there a risk of undesirable people turnover? which ultimately may lead to missing other KPIs due to use of new or inexperienced staff. So this slide compiled from a variety of sources. It provides an indication of results against the commonly used KPIs, from best in class through the average to the laggards. It can be a useful reference point, useful as a catalyst for change. But our advice would be to be careful of relying too much on direct comparisons. Don't take the numbers too literally. You may not be comparing like with like. So it very much depends on what is included in the measurement. For example, what costs are included, or what dates are payments considered to be made. So in one case, we found some companies only include the costs of the people who touch the transaction, whereas others include the costs of management, IT, and so on. However, as I said, they are a useful indicator of the level of difference between best and laggards. In the case of invoice cycle time, we can see best in class is 5 days and laggards is 45 days. And another poll.
Okay, so this poll is about your KPI maturity. So how effective and institutionalised are your KPIs? 5 options again. Are they A, not yet well designed or implemented? B, well designed and effective but not yet institutionalised, so are they embedded? C, they're institutionalised but not fully effective, so everyone knows what they are but they're perhaps not working quite as well as you want. D, they're effective and institutionalised but with some side effects. Or E, they're effective and institutionalised, mature, best practice, and you just enjoy webcasts. It was great to have you if that is the case. So 5 more seconds on that. Okay, and now I'm going to share the results. Let's have a look. So 48% of you saying not yet well designed or implemented. Okay, that's the overall majority. And then 26% institutionalized but not fully effective. Okay, and then a mix between the others. Although it's good to see that perhaps not everyone is mature best practice. That's good that you're all on this webcast. So do keep your questions coming in. We'll endeavour to answer as many as we can at the end, and if you don't get around to, we will get back to you by email. So thank you to Steve for, you kicked us off with some great context there and some scene setting around the GPO and their involvement with the KPIs, different definitions of KPIs. Everyone on this webcast suffers from or has suffered from various challenges and problems with their KPIs. And I should preface this with, there is no magic formula here. There is no one that is doing this perfectly right every single time, and there are some really common challenges. So we're going to discuss those today, as well as making some recommendations about what you and companies like you have discussed with us and shown us to be the ways to help make KPIs work better for you. And there are 3 that kind of keep coming back up time and time again in discussions at conferences, with customers, at workshops, etc. And these seem to be the ones causing the most problems. So we've called them the 3 C's. The first C is conflicts, KPI conflicts. A pretty well-known phenomenon. It's something that every company suffers from. It's very easily done. It's actually quite difficult to make a KPI that doesn't come into conflict with another. A good example of this is if you've got a KPI for paying suppliers on time, and you've got a contract terms that are 30 days, and you really want to ensure that you're hitting the pay on time target, so you decide to pay it early, you pay it in 7 days. Unfortunately, this will come into conflict with your cash flow targets and affect the cash flow KPIs, and potentially have a significant detrimental effect. So whilst one KPI is achieving what you wanted it to do, another suffers as a result. And if you have a lot of micro KPIs, it's more likely that conflict will occur. You're kind of focusing, you end up focusing with a tunnel vision on minute parts of the process, as opposed to taking the broader view of the end-to-end process as a whole, which would help you to pinpoint where the conflict might occur. The discussion on the recommendation on this is basically to discuss your KPIs. Share the discussion, share it upstream, share it downstream, get other departments and other stakeholders involved, ask about the effect that a KPI would have on them and their KPIs, and this should help to minimise the chance of conflict. It's about minimising the risk before you set them, and being able to see the ripple effect on other KPIs. So that's the first C. The second one is compensation. Now, there are really split views on this. Whenever we talk about this in workshops, we have some really interesting discussions. So the first kind of angle on it is that if you pay people based on performance, you're going to motivate them to get good results. The second is that what you're actually paying people for is to achieve good results on the KPI targets, not to necessarily achieve the outcome that you had in mind when the KPI was set. And there's a big difference between the two. And this links quite nicely back to the problem of micro KPIs that we've just discussed, that people are much more likely to focus on the one KPI that they're being paid based upon, and it means that others take lower priority and perhaps suffer as a result. The crux of the issue with compensation being tied to KPIs and their achievement is that you provide additional impetus, and you've got the risk that some people may take this too far, take it to the extreme, and do things that you didn't want them to do to achieve those KPIs. And our outsourcers are a great example of this. Their job is to manage customers. We're their customers, and we pay them based on the achievements of the KPI targets we give them. So it's only natural that they're willing to move heaven and earth to get to that achievement. So what you end up with is exactly what you asked for, which is those KPI targets achieved, but how you got there may be causing process breakdown, and it may not be encouraging the desired behaviour. So, it's a real case of be careful what you wish for. Of course, achieving KPI targets is important, and I think compensation can be used as a motivating factor, but only if you've got quality outcomes and you attach those targets to behaviour that you also want to motivate to achieve those outcomes. So it's a case of working backwards. Start with the end goal or the target of the KPI. Think about the behaviour you want to motivate to get to that target, and then set the KPI. And all of this has to be done before you start paying anyone to achieve them. So that's compensation. The third C is consequences, or unintended consequences. So as we've just discussed, you want to start with the end goal and the consequences when you set the KPIs, but often this comes with side effects or unintended consequences, and they only come to light once you've set the KPI. And of course, you had all the right intentions in setting the first one, but it's ended up causing more problems. We've all actually probably suffered at the hands of an unintended consequence of a KPI. A good example is if you've ever got through to a call centre, and you can just tell they're being paid based on the duration of the call, and they're clearly much more interested in getting you off the phone than they are in actually solving your problem. Of course, the idea of having shorter calls and therefore getting through more complaints is a great idea in theory, but in practicality, you just end up with angry customers. We had another interesting example at a workshop a while ago. A KPI was set to provide detailed management reports. And as part of this, a phone provider was asked to give single invoices per individual to sort of drill down into the expenditure on different phones, etc. And the idea behind it was to get fine-grained detail. But the unintended consequence of this KPI was they had 25,000 invoices per month coming in from the phone provider and causing all sorts of chaos, and there was thousands of suspected duplicates. So again, the simple recommendation here is to discuss the KPI before they're set. If it had been discussed with different departments or different stakeholders, someone probably would have been able to flag up the fact that 25,000 invoices per month wasn't realistic and was actually going to cause more problems than having the fine detail was worth. So again, it's about ensuring there's open dialogue, lots of discussion with different stakeholder groups and departments. So those are the 3 C's. We've left you in the dark now for quite a while about why we've put a picture of a watermelon in this webcast about KPIs and how it's relevant to KPIs. And we just think this sits as a nice metaphor. When we discuss KPIs and we need a way of expressing or presenting them to management, quite often this is done via a dashboard. And you have red, green and amber indicating how well your KPI is doing. Now, clearly having a green dashboard is going to reflect high achievement of KPIs, which is a good thing to present to management. But, and this is the crucial but here, green dashboards are not always synonymous with an entirely perfectly working process. Sometimes the green disguises problems that are actually red underneath. Hence the watermelon picture, green on the outside, red on the inside. And green dashboards can be very misleading. You know, as we've already discussed with the big 3 challenges, people may go above and beyond to get high KPI achievements or entirely green dashboards. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the process by which they're showing, by the way that they've got to this entirely green dashboard, is how you wanted them to achieve all green. The actual process and the achievement of the KPIs aren't necessarily linked. So along sort of similar lines to green dashboards, achieving high percentages on KPIs is another way that we talk about it. Our mathematical brains have been trained to believe that 100% is the ultimate goal. But in the case of KPIs, I have to ask you to think a little bit more deeply about that. Is 100% of something occurring in accordance with a KPI possible or a good thing? It would certainly make me very suspicious and concerned and wonder if people are gaming the system if every single one of your invoices is being paid 100% on time. It doesn't actually sound probable. We know that suppliers let us down, we get deliveries of the wrong thing. There are all sorts of different influences and different relationships on the achievement of KPIs that would mean that they can't be 100% perfect all the time. So if it's showing 100%, if it's showing 100% of process executions are perfect, I'd certainly be very cautious about that because it could be very misleading. Of course, we do want the KPIs that we set to do well and to hit targets. However, sometimes it's worth flipping the achievement of the KPI on its head. Instead of focusing on the big numbers, the 97% that's going well, and instead switching to the smaller 3%, focusing on that 3% that we're still missing out on, despite that perhaps sounding insignificant, it could have a big impact. 3% of duplicate invoices might not be worth 3% of effort and cost. So by switching the focus and chipping away at the smaller numbers, we then also end up with an inverse of the KPI achievement, and we do better. And remember that progress is not linear. It may take 20% cost and effort to achieve 80% of the goal, and you kind of rush straight through that 80% and it all goes well, and then you suddenly hit the last 20% and it is like hitting a brick wall, and suddenly that last 80% of effort and cost needs to go into that. And it could be the hardest part. Remember that it's an ongoing process. There's always new situations and different changes, and there is no quick fix, unfortunately. So here we've got a list of the top 10 KPIs. These are ones that are being most commonly used, kind of the most 10 popular. The most popular there being payment on time. Now, bear in mind we haven't included targets or context or perspective, and all of that does vary between companies and organisations, and those are very important in setting your KPI. And also very crucial to bear in mind that just because these are the most popular definitely doesn't mean that they're necessarily the most effective. But we thought it was a good idea to just give you a little snapshot of the top 10. So the list we just showed you is largely telling us how we're doing. But of course, we also need to know how to improve where we currently are. So this is the typical or classic process improvement cycle that I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with in some form. So we start at the top, you define the process, you measure it, you analyse it, you put in improvements, you implement controls, and the whole cycle starts again. But it certainly feels to us, at least, that there is a large assumption or some form of miraculous occurrence between measuring and analysing. We've measured it and we know we're doing 73% well, but this doesn't tell me what to do to make it better or how to do it. It's very easy to measure stuff, but it's much harder to fix it. So we prefer this view. This view takes into account some different stages, makes it a slightly more practical approach. So at the top there, you've got your process. You start with that. In this case, it's the purchase to pay. You set up performance measures, so your KPIs, and hopefully a nice balance of leading and lagging, whilst trying to avoid the 3 challenges we've discussed. And as you can see, they're important enough to be included in the cycle, but they alone aren't enough. The next step is to identify exceptions, to find where things are not going as planned. And then once you've identified them, it's time to drill down further into the root causes and diagnose where and why and how are things going wrong. And then, of course, you've got to fix the issues, and the cycle starts again continuously, and you form the bottom section there of learning and best practice. So we've had it highlighted to us a number of times that the identifying exceptions part of the process is the most difficult part. So let's just talk about exceptions. Well, many of you have seen this picture before. We use it in a lot of webcasts. So in the picture, you can see there is a car park. It's got a barrier in the middle of it. And if someone wants to get into the car park, they drive up to the barrier and they swipe their ID badge. And if they've got the right permission, then the barrier opens, lets them through, and closes behind them. And it does the same on the way out as well. Every 6 months or so, the company who provide the barrier come along and check on the barrier. They carry out maintenance, and they say that they're able to prove that the barrier works 100% of the time. And they're right, it does. But when winter comes and the snow falls, suddenly we can see tyre tracks in the snow, and it becomes clear that the barrier is being circumnavigated, and there's people potentially without ID cards getting through, others are not being logged into the system, and this works really nicely in relation to KPIs. This is very, very much like a KPI showing 100% or an all green dashboard. It works 100% of the time. 100% of the time that KPI is being met, but this does not mean that the process itself is working 100% of the time. The exceptions you can see there are the tyre tracks, and that's also where you'll find what you need to improve. So even if you have a system in place with automation to give you a standardized process, this sometimes still goes wrong. So let's say you've got a system that runs the P2P process, and you receive a shipment of things that you need, but no PO exists. You need the shipment, you can't send it away, so you call up purchasing and they create a PO based on the information that's on the delivery note. And then a goods receipt is created based on the PO, what we just received. And so in this case, your first time match KPI is doing well. In fact, it's probably pretty perfect if POs are being created this way. But what is also clear is that the process is suffering from a breakdown. And actually the irony is, the more people circumnavigate the process, the better your KPI will do. So it's really crucial to remember to not confuse the process for the system. The system can be working perfectly, but that does not necessarily mean that your process is. So KPIs alone aren't enough. We've talked about performance measures and the challenges with them, and we've also made some recommendations on how to fix them. We've also discussed the process around identifying exceptions. So what comes next? I'm going to hand back to Steve now to shed some light. Steve.
Thanks, Emma. The key to this discussion is knowing how your process is actually working, being aware where there are significant deviations from what should be happening at a process level, being aware where there are patterns of activity that may be unusual, suspicious, or suboptimal. And this is where the use of business process analytics can identify relevant exceptions and increase the insight and transparency of the business process. Using automated analytics to get into the detail of what's going on and report back in a meaningful and actionable way. And analytics have been identified by CFOs and GPOs as a key strategy to facilitate better decision making, to enhance standardization and simplification, to manage risk, assure compliance, reduce cost, and to improve overall business performance. Returning to our earlier slide, but with another key element. We've worked out our balanced set of outcomes, our leading and lagging indicators to help us know what is working well and what is not working well. However, to address what is not working well, we need to know what to improve and where to improve. And this is where identifying exceptions through analytics is needed. The specific exceptions and unusual patterns. It could be prices are varying on the purchase order against the invoice, but within tolerance. And there are patterns of activity taking advantage of the allowed tolerance. Could be backdated POs, purchase orders that comply with the system checks, but in reality, the process itself is broken, as per Emma's example. So common themes for P2P analytics. So data quality of the transactions and the master data used in the process. It's essentially impacting the cycle time, the cost of the process. It can result in unauthorized, inappropriate spend. Three-way match, so a detailed analysis comparison of what is ordered, what is actually received, and how much will be in charge. Yes, there will be upfront controls in the system to cross-check and match, but typically there are ways to circumvent those controls or take advantage of tolerances. Again, can result in incorrect deliveries and excessive payments. And of course, payments. So a vendor may be blocked for payment for good reasons, or a vendor may have been set up to be used once only. Again, there are ways to circumvent these controls, resulting in undesirable payments. Optimal terms may have been agreed as part of the initial contract. However, individual orders may be overriding the standard terms, potentially resulting in requirement to pay earlier and affecting cash flow. Here are the top 10 analytics currently in use for P2P. Duplicates does tend to be a common start point, as there is money leaving the company by mistake or for inappropriate reasons. Employee vendor match can uncover potentially fraudulent activity. Split purchase requisitions is used to avoid getting higher level approval to spend the money. Variations in the patterns of invoice numbers can indicate fraudulent activity. And frequent master data changes indicates quality of master data may not be good, can also indicate inappropriate activity, changes to bank account details and so on. So in terms of getting a good view of how we're performing today, our current model, and identifying where we can improve to move toward a desired future target, we need the right tools, and those tools include a good balanced set of KPIs, leading and lagging, performance measures and performance drivers, outcome value, and analytics to identify the key process exceptions. Good use of those tools will help us optimize our current performance and also help us identify what we need to do to move toward the model we aspire to. This is our success framework for the GPO role. We call it the Pentagon. It covers all the key elements that need to be considered, need to come together to enable a successful, continuously improving model. All elements are important, and KPIs, analysis, and insight are a key piece of the jigsaw at the bottom. We've talked about KPIs and the relationship to analytics. As further input to the discussion, here are the recommendations from Deloitte on what the priorities should be for shared service leaders in 2017. It's interesting reading. 3 of the priorities are very central to this discussion. So point 1, review the whole end-to-end process. Don't just focus on efficiency within the shared service center. The broader context must be considered. Effectiveness of the whole end-to-end process, and ultimately effectiveness of how the business is working is key. So look upstream and downstream from the shared service center. Pure technical efficiency inside the SSC may be having undesirable impacts elsewhere. Point 2, to be effective and to be accountable, the GPO must have the necessary authority and must have the right tools and resources to do the job. KPIs and analytics being a key part of this in the context of the overall success framework. And point 4, the consensus is that analytics are needed to gain the visibility into an end-to-end process that may be dispersed across multiple groups and geographies using ERP and other IT applications to support the process. Without the insight and visibility analytics can enable, we're effectively constrained in your decision making and working on a limited understanding of how the process is actually working. So a summary of key points to conclude on, thoughts to leave you with. Thought and dialogue. Think about the spirit and the application of the KPI as well as the individual target. Discuss upstream and downstream for the broad context. As we said earlier, KPIs are common practice, but common sense not always applied in their use. Behaviour. KPIs will influence and drive behaviours. What behaviours your KPIs result in? Are they the desirable behaviours? So think about what behaviour will be caused by the KPIs in place. And finding and driving improvement opportunities. If we're not improving performance, then the KPIs are not being used as effectively as they could be. So to conclude on, if this discussion has been of interest, and we hope it has, I hope we've given some food for thought, and some of the themes we've discussed resonate, then here are some options to go deeper. For the GPO, Global Process Owner, there is a webcast we ran earlier in the year you may find interesting, and the recording is available on our website at consider.biz. Also, we facilitate interactive on-site workshops to drive the consensus around the role of the GPO. For a deeper dive on KPIs and analytics in the P2P process, again, we use workshops to drive that discussion, to gain consensus between the different stakeholders. And if you'd like to get a rapid, direct understanding of what analytics can actually do for your company and where it can help, then we can run a set of advanced analytics on your data and share the results. So please just get in touch if any of these are of interest, and there's some details will be on the final slide. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. I think we're very close to the end of our allotted time as well. I can see several questions have been asked. Emma, do we have time to look at one?
Yes, I think we've got time to look at one. There's one here that I think is very interesting, and hopefully should be quite interesting for everyone else to hear the answer to as well. So it is, who is best placed to define what the KPIs for the end-to-end process should be? But we have different process owners for procurement and accounts payable. That's okay. That's quite a tough one. Steve? Good
question. And a common challenge, and I guess P2P is an interesting process, as this is because you quite commonly have ownership of each component in separate pillars of finance and procurement. So there is a choice. I think you can focus purely on accounts payable, invoice to pay, but again, in that context, you need to be aware of the micro KPIs that Emma talked about. If the motivation is there, then try to bring together a true end-to-end view, and a good option to do that is to have a brief workshop for the stakeholders in each pillar, so finance and procurement, to share their plans for KPIs. For example, if you've got some KPIs for AP, share them with procurement and other stakeholders to gain a consensus. So again, trying to get a broader dialogue, and we've talked about upstream and downstream several times, but again, it's getting that broader context on the what those KPIs may do in the context. Keep in mind again the high-level outcomes of what you're trying to achieve. Look at the leading and lagging indicators and impact on other stakeholders. That kind of approach also should stimulate some thought on bringing the close alignment between procurement and finance. So some thoughts there. I think certainly if the motivation is there, look to get the stakeholders together. Okay, I'm getting a sign that I think we've just run over our time. So again, thank you all for attending. We do hope you found the discussion of interest and value. Please do feel free to get in touch. Details are on the slide on the screen right now. So thank you again for taking the time to attend, and have a great day.